January 16, 1947. Assignment, Wilmington. Our subject tonight is strange, weird stories of the supernatural around Wilmington. Yes, the supernatural. Legends of Wilmington and Lower Delaware that have been handed down from generation to generation. Weird stories. Of course, we know there's no truth to them. Who ever heard of real ghosts? And we know there's nothing to voodooism. But, on the other hand, you never can tell. Tonight, we want to tell you some of the strange legends you hear around town and around the state. No, you won't find them in history books, but on quiet nights when the fire is burning low on the hearth and when the conversation gets around to mysteries and the supernatural, old-timers fill their pipes, settle back in their chairs, and spin yarn after yarn that make you creep. Stories that make you wonder whether the dancing shadows on the walls are ghosts or phantoms or just plain shadows. For example, there's the story of the house on French Street near 6th. It's in the 600 block on the west side of French. It used to be known as the Dr. Deedea house. Once upon a time, there was a French physician named Dr. Pierre Deedea. He migrated to Wilmington from Santo Domingo in the West Indies. They had a revolution there, and the good doctor fled to the security of Wilmington. That was in the year 1794. He lived here, made many friends, and he left his home to one of the DuPonts, subject to a rent charge of 25 shillings for 2,000 years. All the money to go to the wardens and vestrymen of Old Swede's church. Ah, but that's very interesting indeed. But not half as interesting as the story of the well and the ghost. In the year 1783, before the good doctor came to Wilmington, the house was the home of French Kellum, a seaman. Kellum left Wilmington on a brig bound for the West Indies. The vessel was unheard of for many months. Her owners here in Wilmington were about to write off their loss, and then one evening the ship sailed up the Christina River and docked at the wharf at the foot of French Street. French Kellum dressed his very best. He hurried up French Street to his home and family. But in his hurry up the street, he slipped and fell in the mud from head to toe. And rather than appear at home after so many months, bedraggled and dirty and covered with mud, he paused at the well to wash himself, to wash it off. And then he fell in. The helpless sailor sank. He tried in vain to grasp the slippery side of the well. He yelled and screamed. He clawed the rocky side in vain. But when it was too late, His screams attracted attention in the house. His poor wife and her landlady, who lived with them, heard the unearthly noises outside, and after a long while, they decided to investigate. By that time, everything was quiet in the yard outside the house. They looked around. They saw nothing. They heard nothing. Just then, as Mrs. Kellum was standing near the well, the moon came from behind the clouds, and she glanced into the well. She shrieked and then collapsed. The poor woman saw the face of her husband in the well, and nothing for a while could persuade her that it was not a ghost. But from time to time, the story is now half forgotten, from time to time it was said that the ghost of French Kellum could be seen on moonlit nights, rushing up French Street to his house above 6th, dashing up the steps into the little garden, and jumping into the well. And then there's the story of Fiddlers Bridge. Listen to the factual side of the story.
Fiddlers Bridge is a small country bridge across Scott's Run near St. George's, Delaware, a few miles south of Wilmington. There are swamp trees near the bridge, and when the wind is rough, the swaying and creaking of the tree branches creates a weird noise.
Ah, that's the factual story. But listen. Listen to what some of the folks have always said about Fiddlers Bridge. Once upon a time, there was a country fiddler in the vicinity of St. George's, and he was invited to play at dances and parties and fairs all through the southern part of Newcastle County. And he was popular because he was so jolly. But one time, he was jilted by a girl. No one ever knew he had even been in love. But he became morose and sad, and he didn't go to any more parties nor dances, but instead he used to sit for hours during the nights on the little bridge across Scott's Run and play his fiddle. He played weird tunes, strange tunes. And then, one night, the fiddler fell into the creek and drowned. And since that night, so the folks down there say, since that night you can hear the fiddler's weird music if you drop a silver coin in the water. But it must be a silver coin, and it must be exactly at midnight. And you will hear the music of the poor, unrequited lover. Or it might be just the swaying of the trees. It might be. And here's another story, the story of Wild Harry of Wilmington and the Indian Maid. Let's hear the more prosaic side of the story first.
Well, the story, as far as we know, was written in serial form years ago by John Laughlin of Wilmington under the pen name of the Milford Bard. It was a sort of a Victorian soap opera, a sad and weepy story of a young Wilmington man by the name of Harry who fell in love with an Indian girl, Manitou. And it is said she threw herself over the rocks along the upper reaches of the Brandy Wine near Rockford Tower. Just a romantic serial story, that's all.
A little cynical there, hmm? Well, listen. That's what some people say, but those who know their legends of the Brandy Wine will tell you differently. I can't tell you exactly where, but legend is that somewhere along the rocky formations on the banks of the Brandy Wine, near Henry Clay, where the wooded shores tower high in granite formations, if you look long enough and diligently enough, you'll come across the names of Manitou and Wild Harry engraved on the stone. And none of the elements has been able to erase those names. How do I know? Well, that's the legend that has persisted. And there are even some who say that the ghosts of Manitou and Wild Harry come there every so often and re-engrave their names on the stone. And the story goes that Wild Harry of Wilmington jilted the Indian girl. Harry lived on King Street. No one seemed to know how he earned his living. Some people said he was a freebooter, a smuggler. And one night, in a fit of anguish, Manitou flung herself from the rocks down through the wooded palisade-like shore into the Brandy Wine. And Harry, distraught and heartbroken, immediately left for a life of wandering. He went to Bremen, Germany, to Spain, to the West Indies. And one night, soon after his return to Wilmington, he was sitting in old Swede's churchyard when he saw the apparition of the Indian girl. He followed it until it disappeared into the night air. And every now and then there crops up a story about the ghosts of Wild Harry and Manitou being seen along the Brandy Wine. But the most persistent legend is about their names engraved on one of the rocky ledges, an engraving that defies the rain and wind and storm. Perhaps one of the best ghost stories in Delaware is about old Samuel Chu, Chief Justice of Delaware. Here are the facts.
Samuel Chu, born 1693, appointed Chief Justice of Delaware in 1741, remained in office 3 years when he died. They say he died a restless man of 57 years, restless, turbulent, and never at peace with the world. He was buried near Dover.
Ah, yes, that's what the regular history books say. But there's the legend of old Dover. About a year after the Chief Justice died and was buried, one night a miller of Dover was hurrying across the Dover Green. Now, the Dover Green was pretty much the same in those days of the middle 1700s as it is today. Picturesque houses on the fringe of the green, trees, old gardens. And on this particular night, it must have been about 1746, the miller hurrying home stopped dead in his tracks. For there, under a poplar tree, stood the Chief Justice in his judicial gown, his head bowed in meditation. The terrified miller forced his steps homeward, running with superhuman speed as soon as he could free himself from the hypnosis of the apparition. A few nights later, a rustic, just a country bumpkin, was passing by the same poplar tree, and he saw the same ghostly figure of Chief Justice Chu standing under the tree in meditation. And the story spread like wildfire. Dover residents took to remaining home at nights. No one would go near the green after sundown. Finally, tavern keepers began to complain. They were losing business. And so it was decided to hold a public funeral to bury the ghost. Yes, the good people of Dover held a funeral. It was a sunny day, the church bells tolled, and there was a clergyman there, and almost all of Dover. There was a funeral procession around the green, and it finally terminated at the poplar tree. A grave was dug, and the ghost of Chief Justice Samuel Chu was consigned to the grave. It was filled in, and the mourners went home. That night, no one went near the green. They say there was some strange rustling of trees, and the ghost of Samuel Chu was never seen again. Well, we could go on and tell you story after story about the headless horseman of nearby Kennett Square, of the ghost of a restless farmer at 43rd and Market Street, of the ghost of the man who was killed in a duel along the Marsh Road, or we could tell you of the ghost in Belmont Hall near Smyrna. Yes, Delaware has many ghost stories that are better even than the best of Sleepy Hollow, but that's enough for tonight.